At exactly 5 minutes past the top of the hour, which is 8 a.m. Thank you for being with us and welcome to Good Morning Uganda Agenda. Once again, I'm Robert Chirabo Nyonyintono, and this is a time where we look at issues that are very relevant to Ugandans and of national importance. And remember, in this segment, you're able to be part of the topic of discussion by simply going to our various social media platforms. But of that, we also have a WhatsApp number where you can send us either a WhatsApp message or an SMS, and I'll be reading out those messages, and of course the guests that we have respond to your concerns, your observations, your input into the topic of discussion. And today we are going to be looking at an amendment, which is the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill 2021. While in 2015 we passed, that is the Public Finance Amendment Act, and it was assented to by the President, also went into the Gazette. However, now again we are at it, reason being is to allow companies in the oil to be able to partake a portion of some of the monies that they are making. And joining me on set are members from the civil society organizations, and their aim is to ensure proper laws and regulations that will enhance proper managing and management, of course, of our public finances. I have Ronald Mugobera, who happens to be the Budget Policy Specialist, CSBAG, which is the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. Ronald, you're most welcome to our studios.
Thank you very much. To our viewers, good morning. We are happy to be here this morning discussing issues of public finance management amendment bill, as you said, and we hope that this will result into a fruitful discussion, and we have prudence and management of Uganda's oil revenues. Thank you.
And I think you have a distance of 2 meters, so you can excuse yourself of a mask, but please do not try this elsewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, because one of the methods to agitate for is ensuring that you have the SOPs in place, or the standard operating procedures, and one of them is social distancing as much as possible. On my extreme end, I have James Muhinda, who is the National Coordinator, Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas. You're most welcome, James.
Thank you very much. Good morning, viewers. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss public finance and how revenues from oil ought to be used and managed. I look forward to the discussion.
Let me begin with Ronald. Ronald, when we talk about public finances, in the interest of our viewers to better understand public finances and of course management, what are we referring to?
Public finance management simply refers to a set of rules, procedures, and regulations that countries put in place to ensure that they mobilize revenues or resources, allocate these resources to the areas or priorities of public interest, and also make sure that there are control mechanisms to ensure that these revenues are not put to waste. In other words, the revenues must yield to socio-economic transformation, alleviating people from poverty, basically making sure that the revenue that government collects, allocates, are put to better use to ensure that the key objectives of government are achieved. Yes.
Relatedly on that, what are the legal and that is policy provisions for public financing regarding our country?
Thank you very much. There are several legal and policy provisions that are there to ensure that Uganda has prudent public finance management systems or structures. And we have the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda as the mother or arch document. We have others like the Public Finance Management Act, like the one that you talked about, the one that was passed in 2015. We have the Local Government Act, because remember Uganda we have decentralization, so even at the local government there are resources that that are utilized at that level to ensure services reach the final person. We have other guidelines that are issued depending on the time. We have planning guidelines issued by the National Planning Authority and also Minister of Local Government to manage it, finances at that level. So literally, all these instruments are managed. These are just among them. We have the public, the PPD Act, because you understand that the largest percentage of our resources, for instance, the national budget, which is a public finance management tool, so over 60% is spent through procurement. So we have the PPD Act that is there to make sure that there's prudence in public procurement to safeguard the resources. So there are others, and these definitely have institutions that manage them. For instance, the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the one responsible for the budget, the one responsible for mobilization of resources and allocation. Then we have the line ministries, departments and agencies, and local governments that are responsible for now utilization of the resources. So there are structures in place that ensure that these government entities or the entities that get funds from the consolidated fund utilize them prudently to ensure that there is no misuse and the funds realize what they do, what they are intended to achieve. But again, definitely sometimes we have so let's say missing links in the system, and they are controlled to that. That's when we have the Auditor General's office to do the auditing. We have others to make sure that those who have maybe been found culpable of mismanagement of the resources are held to account. So it is a system of various players, an interplay of various players and systems to make sure that we have one final product of prudent public finance management.
I love that we have enough legal frameworks, we have enough policies to ensure that public finances are managed very well. I'll come to James. James, you're from this oil sector, civil society organization that looks in the area of oil. 2015, we had an act. We had a law put in place and we thought all was done and dusted. Of course, now we are back at it for an amendment. What are we seeking for and why the need for this amendment?
Yes, as explained by my colleague, in 2015 the Public Finance Management Act set out the fiscal regime to be applied here in Uganda, where revenues, right from collection of revenues, irrespective of whether it's tuition at a university or taxes paid to URA or licenses paid for driving permit, all those revenues are supposed to be sent to the consolidated fund, and Parliament through appropriation is supposed to come up with mechanisms through which those revenues are sent back to the entities that need to provide services. And also, as Ronald said, there are also mechanisms for prudent management of these revenues. The intention was to safeguard revenues. There were so many leakages in the past where every revenue collecting entity was being allowed to spend a portion of its revenue at source. So in 2015, the Public Finance Management Act came in to stop the risk or the losses of revenues that were occurring as a result of institutions spending at source. That's why currently we have a system where even university tuition, as I mentioned, is not spent by the university. It's first sent to the consolidated fund, and then the university has a budget that is approved by Parliament and money is appropriated to them, then revenues are sent back for spending. So this has been the case since 2015, with an exception of a few institutions such as URA that may from time to time need resources to spend, but they also put in place a mechanism for how those other exceptional circumstances can be handled without compromising the safeguards from revenue loss. So the current amendment, coming to your question now, seeks to allow Uganda National Oil Company an opportunity to first of all be able to receive money on behalf of government, as opposed to the money being sent to the consolidated fund, and secondly, to use some of those resources to meet its expenses and obligations. So because this is not consistent with the current fiscal arrangement under the Public Finance Management Act, that's why we are having these amendments to align the intended actions of UNOC with the Public Finance Management Act. Maybe for our viewers out there who may not have a full background of the sector, in April this year, the President of Tanzania was here in Uganda, and the President of SINOC and Total. They were here to sign a number of agreements in relationship to the East African crude oil pipeline. The East African crude oil pipeline is the 1,444 kilometer long pipeline that will be taking oil from our fields in Hoima to the coast of Tanga in Tanzania. So in April, at the signing of these agreements, which included intergovernmental agreement between Uganda and Tanzania, host government agreement between Uganda and the companies that are going to transport oil, and then tariff and transportation agreement and a shareholding agreement. These agreements had a number of provisions and commitments which Uganda has to fulfill. And because the Uganda National Oil Company is Uganda's commercial arm, it's the one that will have the obligation to fulfill these conditions. And it turns out now, like I mentioned, some of the terms and conditions in those contracts would require an amendment of the Public Finance Management Act. And that's why we have this amendment coming up. But as civil society, we have developed our position and taken a stand that the fiscal arrangement as we have it at the moment is safe, and we don't have to tamper with it because of the risks we've seen in the past in terms of corruption, loss of revenue, the failure by URA to collect the relevant revenues required. We are grappling with debt, and we need to as much resources as we can. So risking any changes to our fiscal arrangement that would pose a risk of us losing some of the revenues, notwithstanding the
that brings me to the content, sorry to interject you, to the content of the amendment that is before Parliament. I know you've been privileged to look at some of them, and of course many of them, remember what came out most was the number of the shares that Uganda will have, then what the company has. So let's look at these. Are they in favor of the interests of Ugandans, or are they more in favor of the companies that are going to run in there? And let me start with Ronald, I think, at this point. Content of the bill as it stands now that is before Parliament.
Well, thank you very much. Like James has explained, Lebert explained very well, the bill has been brought in to allow SINOC retain a portion of the proceeds from government stake or participating in the oil business. We well understand that SINOC, UNOC, the Uganda National Oil Company, is the commercial arm of government when it comes to the oil business. That is very good. We know it may need access to money at a time as and when it needs it to do its obligation, to meet its obligations. At the current Public Finance Management Act provides for that to enable UNOC, UNOC, yes. Sorry, forgive me for, to enable UNOC access the money other than when it needs it. But when you look at the amendment, the amendment bill in its current form, when it is passed in this current form, you realize that UNOC is going to be having access to the oil revenue without it going through the Petroleum Fund. Because in the current state, all petroleum revenue is supposed to be deposited in the Petroleum Fund. And UNOC having access to that revenue without it going through the Petroleum Fund means that the controls and safeguards that are in place to ensure transparency and accountability of petroleum revenue are going to be, they are under threat, and they are going to be put away. And to this extent, like James was explaining to us, that we are having high levels of debt. We are expecting that when the revenue comes, when the petroleum revenue comes, we shall see Uganda having some breathing fiscal space. We expect that our domestic revenues will increase. Apparently, we are not doing very well as a country, because Uganda's revenue to GDP ratio apparently that is estimated at around 13%, which is far below the sub-Saharan African average of 16%. So our expectations from petroleum revenues, we expect that our tax revenue collections are going to increase, and we shall increase our revenue to GDP ratio. But when you allow UNOC to, for instance, retain petroleum revenue without it going to the Petroleum Fund, they have the leverage to use it for whatever they want. Like I explained before, the safeguards that are in place to ensure that these funds are not mismanaged, they are handled prudently. Those safeguards will be less effective in ensuring that the petroleum revenues are used for the benefit of the citizens.
James, this brings me just look at what is the current status of the regulations, the policies in terms of oil regarding the public finance management of these funds. Currently, what do we have? Because you talked about, you insisted that what we have is sufficient enough. Yes. In your opinion, what do we have?
Yes. At the moment, oil revenues are provided for in Part 8 of the Public Finance Management Act. And the arrangement is that all oil revenues, upon being received by government, are supposed to be sent to URA. URA remits those revenues to the Consolidated Fund, and then they are sent to the Petroleum Fund. This fund, money is only supposed to leave the Petroleum Fund after it has been appropriated by Parliament, and the PFMA goes ahead to detail some of the strategic sectors that this money needs to be used to invest in, sectors that have a ripple effect in terms of being able to stimulate the economy. So the other alternative is the money will leave the Petroleum Fund to go to the Petroleum Investment Fund. The PFMA is alive to the fact that oil is finite. There is going to come a time 20, 30 years from now when we shall not have it. So it puts in place an arrangement where part of the money will be put aside and invested so that Uganda can perpetually have revenue. Even generations that may come after us will have some revenue to use. So that's, in a nutshell, the arrangement at the moment, where all the money, as long as it's petroleum revenue, it has to go to URA sends it to the Consolidated Fund and then Petroleum Fund, and it can only leave the Petroleum Fund after appropriation by Parliament. or it goes to the investment reserve. However, the amendments we have here, maybe to start with the specifics, if I can weigh in on what my colleague Ronald was answering, the amendment seeks to change the definition of petroleum revenue. The PFMA at the moment has a very broad definition of petroleum revenue to include all proceeds from our oil. And according to the bill and its movers, the cost of transporting oil should not be included in petroleum revenue. So there is a proposal that our petroleum revenue, whatever we get, it should be reduced by the cost of transportation, and then what remains is what will be called petroleum revenue. Otherwise, the law as it is at the moment, it means all revenue has to be subjected to that fiscal arrangement, as I have explained. The other definition, the other change is the spending at source or use of this money, because the arrangement right now in sections 58 and 59 of the Public Finance Management Act, all revenues have to first go full circle and appropriated.
Accounted for, appropriated, yes, very well, yes.
Before you use them. But UNOC, based on the agreements that were signed in April, has certain obligations that have to be met on call. So they were proposing that some of this revenue, instead of it going through the whole cycle, should be retained by UNOC and used to spend on those expenses and obligations under the agreements it signed in April. The other amendment, I think, is looking at payment in kind, where we shall be receiving oil instead of receiving money. So those are some of the amendments that we think are being proposed, and to us, the definition of petroleum revenue does not have to change. The analogy I can use is, if you are dealing in matoke, the price of matoke is 5,000. Just because you spend 1,000 on transport doesn't mean the price of matoke is 4,000. All the money you get when you sell is the price. In economics, it's called cost of sales. It's part of the money you've made. Much as it's not all profit, it's all part of the money you've made from that resource. So I think we don't have to make this change. And as to the proposal for UNOC to retain some money to spend at source, our position has been that URA has the same challenge, where from time to time they need resources to spend at source. But the arrangement that is in the URA Act is that even when URA needs to spend money that it has received without remitting it to the consolidated fund, it's required to first get approval in writing from the minister, and the expenses upon which that spending is being done need to have been part of its annual budget, so that they are not emerging or arbitrary out of the blue. And that's the safeguard we think we need UNOC to look into the possibility of adopting the URA model, as opposed to opening this window, which after we've opened,
you're not
for
very
UNOC,
sure of what
we are going to have universities also saying we need to spend, local governments,
we need monotony,
sub-counties, everyone will soon want to see.
Among the fears you have, this could set a wrong precedent.
Very much so.
And this wrong precedent would affect accountability, would also affect bodies coming up with proper budgets, proper priorities, because then we have cash at flow and we can determine what happens. Well, it is time I come to you, our viewers, and remind you that you can be part of the topic of discussion by simply going to your phone and sending us a WhatsApp message on the number of your screen, also an SMS message, and I'll be ready to read it out. The number is 0709 60 2592, 0709 60 2592. We're looking at the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill 2021, which is on the floor of Parliament, and this is an amendment to the previous law that was passed in 2015. The main aim is to allow, that is UNOC, to be able to take a percentage of what they collect from the oil. And this is what civil society organizations are coming up and saying, no, this monotony somehow could be a problem. Why don't we retain what we've been having? The changes we are forwarding may not land us to a desired area. You know, oil globally, oil does two things. It is either a blessing. The opposite is a word I fear to say.
You better say it, because you need to, you need to face your fears. So
I need to face my fears.
Yes.
So it is either a blessing or a curse.
Yes.
If well managed, countries can jubilate. I know of countries in the world that have so much oil, yet they have the poorest among the poor.
Yes.
With this God-given resource. And one thing that also, Ronald, you brought out very clearly, I think, no, James, you brought out very clearly, was that oil is not forever. These guys, Sotonias, this what, at a time, it may be a normal resource. So if we do not plan very well for this gold that we're having now, the oil where we have this whole entire excitement, then it can land us somewhere. But let's also look at the institutions involved here in regulating. Have they had sufficient input? Because we can tame, we can stop, we can avoid at parliamentary level. Thereafter, we may not have so much hands on impacting of this.
In terms of institutions, my opinion is that there's really been a lot of capacity building for the relevant institutions. As you may be aware, oil was discovered in 2006 here in Uganda, commercially viable deposits, and it's over 15 years since the discovery. So that has been an opportunity for government to put in place relevant institutions, to build capacity of staff in those institutions. And my opinion is that, having interacted with colleagues from Petroleum Authority, National Oil Company, Ministry of Energy, Office of the Auditor General, all these entities are doing all they can to build capacity internally to be able to play their role. In 2020, last year, Uganda also joined the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, which is an initiative that ensures that countries that have oil and other minerals use these resources in a transparent and accountable manner. And the Ministry of Finance is taking lead on this. So my personal opinion is that in terms of preparation and institutional structure to govern or manage oil and gas well, we already have that. What remains to be seen is how to operationalize these institutions. But also, we think, having made a good law in 2015, it's not good to be rolling back on those gains that we made in 2015 by undoing the safeguards that were put in place, because there is a reason as to why Parliament in 2015 passed the PFMA as it is, with the positions knowing we will definitely have to export our oil and we'll have to pay for the transport. So what leaves us baffled is, why are we changing some of these things? And on top of the PFMA, there is also the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Amendment Bill, which is also before Parliament. And this bill is also rolling back on some of the provisions that were in the, of course, the PFMA, in the Petroleum Act, the Acts of 2013, and some of the positions which are in the National Oil and Gas Policy. So we think we have invested these 15 years in preparing, but if we are not careful, we can undo all the good work that we've done in terms of preparation if we start tampering with some of the safeguards that have been in place over time.
Ronald, James clearly brings out fears, saying, I think, on the right track. What may happen with amendments that could lead us into undesirable areas? But what could be the main motive? Because amendments come to improve. To improve the previous law due to the demand that is a necessity at such a time. Don't you believe or see that it's very relevant that UNOC now, which is our national company, in terms of managing our oil, in terms of the revenues as well, don't you think that this amendment aims at, first and foremost, streamlining this whole sector in terms of management? You know, oil is a new thing in Uganda. And I want to believe that. But also we know that it has a number of shares. First, it's a very expensive venture.
Yes.
I don't know many countries where a government can in full gear attempt issues of oil. Many countries globally, that's why you see these companies, because you need a lot of investments.
Yes,
now,
sure.
when we come to some of these conditions that come by, don't you think it's really important that this particular body, UNOC, can handle this better? And of course, bureaucracy has always been one of the challenges that we've been having in terms of many of these institutions when it comes to effective delivery.
Well, I am cognizant of the fact that UNOC is our business arm in the oil business. The current Public Finance Management Act has provisions on how the petroleum revenue should be handled.
Which some people are saying there's so much bureaucracy in this, and we are looking at expediting the process, and this could be delays, quick decision taking.
There are safeguards that are in place to ensure that the bureaucracies can be, should I say, smoothened to facilitate access to money or funds as and when it will deem it fit. The Public Finance Management Act in its current form has sections that provide for supplementaries. If at any one time, given the nature of its operations, may need to have money or access to revenue, it may go through the normal process that James was explaining of seeking or of appropriation. That is the safeguard that is there. But again, we as civil society organizations, we have a recommendation that if possible, can have a memorandum of understanding between Bank of Uganda and the Ministry of Finance, so that it can have the resources or financial resources it so needs on a call-away basis, on a call basis. All this is intended to ensure that there's transparency, there's accountability, there are control mechanisms. There are control mechanisms. I well understand that we may have to treat UNOC separately. I mean, special treatment to UNOC to enable it carry on its activities smoothly in the interest of the public. But now the question that we need to find answers is, how well should it do it?
How well should it do it?
How well should it do it without compromising the existing prudent public finance management laws and policies?
Well, I want to thank you so much for that, and of course, in the interest of time, I'm going to be giving each one of you just a minute to give me your final shots regarding the Public Finance Amendment Bill that is before Parliament.
My parting shot is that as Parliament looks at the PFMA, they need to look back to 2015 and understand why the provisions that are being amended were put in place. We have corruption, we have revenue leakages, we have lack of accountability and lack of transparency, all these which we were seeking to guard against. Have these been addressed? If we could do it for sub-counties and local governments and town councils that collect millions of shillings in revenue, why shouldn't we do it for UNOC, which is going to be collecting billions of dollars in resources? So the ball is in Parliament's court. We call upon them to take these decisions judiciously.
Ronald, your final shots.
Thank you very much. Well, UNOC is not so exceptional that its participation, its participation in the petroleum business is not as, I want to give an example of
briefly, please.
The defense budget is appropriated by government, not so. But you know, issues of national security are so sensitive, but still Parliament has a stake in appropriating it. So, UNOC should be given the opportunity to meet its obligations, but with scrutiny, with oversight, and appropriation functions of Parliament embedded in there.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Ronald Mugobera, who is the budget policy specialist at CSBAC, that is Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, and James Muhindo, who is the National Coordinator, Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas, for having found time. We hope for the best. Parliamentarians, you have heard the views coming in from civil society. May we have what is in the interest of all Ugandans for this oil we have in Uganda, so that conclusively it is a blessing and at no time a curse. Have a lovely day. I'll leave you with Ruben to take you through the world of sports, and of course don't forget to go for your jab in case you haven't. It is long overdue. Go and get your jab because you want to fight death. No Ugandan should die as a result of COVID-19 because they weren't vaccinated. The vaccines are present, and also remember to have your mask on, social distance, and regular washing of your hands with water and soap or having a sanitizer. God bless you. Stay safe.
It's the festive season and we love it. And that means it's time to celebrate with GoTV.
Come with me.
So get your GoCoder and GoTV value for 25,000 shillings to watch with the whole family. And if you're feeling extra festive, upgrade to our best package yet, GoTV Super.
Something to look forward to.
Download the My GoTV app for more information.
Super.
We all deserve a super festive season. And with GoTV, there's every reason to love it.
It's no secret that ICT makes learning easy.
The strides made in our field could not be possible without it.
And now we can watch our favorite show.
My radio is my best friend.
UCC provides an enabling regulatory environment and policy guidance for healthy competition. We also facilitate ease of doing business in the communications sector through licensing, standardization, spectrum management, tariff regulation, rural communication development, and consumer empowerment. An informed consumer is an empowered consumer. UCC supports local content and innovations. Driving the development of a robust communication sector in Uganda is Uganda Communications Commission.
Hello everyone, and